Hello and welcome. In this video, you're going to learn the two most important rook endgames in chess, the Lucena's Bridge and the Philidor Position, also known as the third rank defense. Let's go. The first most important rook endgame is the Lucena's Position or Lucena's Bridge. Let's see what it's all about. So we're in this rook endgame, we're playing with the white pieces, and we're up a pawn at the moment. We're about to promote, the pawn is going this way, and let's see how we win this position. The technique is in 3 different steps, but before we get into the steps, I just want to say this may seem like a position you're never going to reach, but it's quite common, and I'm going to show you how to reach it as well. Because a lot of other resources just tell you, hey, this position is winning because of this, but they never tell you how to reach it from your game. So for example, right now, we're going to first take a look at the steps and then how to reach it. Step 1 is going to be to give a check to the enemy king. That way, they have to go away from our king, allowing us to get out and threaten to promote. So step 1, give a check. Step 2 is going to be move your rook to the 4th rank. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We count from below and we move to the 4th. Now, that seems a little bit like, oh, why would I do that? But let's try to get some understanding behind that. So the point of this endgame is to try to promote your pawn. That's how you win. You promote and they have to probably give the rook for that pawn and then you just checkmate with the rook. However, in order to do so, we must first escape with the king. That's why we gave the initial check. But if you escape with the king immediately, trying to promote, the problem is that you don't have a good answer to all of these checks with the rook. So there's going to keep giving us checks forever. Wherever you go, there's going to keep giving checks. And we have to stay protecting our pawn. So for that reason, this doesn't really seem like progress. At some point, the only way to break these checks is to go back under the pawn. At that point, they just wait around. So for that reason, we need to do a little bit of preparation. And that preparation is at the start to play the move rook to c4. So get to the 4th rank, because this is the perfect position for our rook to be close enough to our king once we start getting out and zigzagging towards our rook to cover ourselves at the end. That's the key. So it's the perfect position to be close enough to our king, but far away from the enemy king. Because if we inched one step closer, then we could possibly get under attack. So the 4th rank, that's just something that you're going to have to kind of memorize until it becomes intuitive later. So step 2, get the rook to the 4th rank. And they have to basically wait around with a rook move or a king move. Let's say king move. And now comes step 3, get the king out, zigzag, as we're going to see very soon, and build the bridge. When you block like that, when you block the check, as we're going to see very soon, that's called building the bridge. So let's take a look at how it works. Now we get the king out and we're threatening to promote. So for that reason, they have to keep giving us check after here. And our job is to zigzag very precisely down to our rook to be able to cover ourselves at the end. Now, the reason I say very precisely is because after they give us a check, a lot of players may go here, go as close as possible to the rook. However, that would just hang our pawn, and rook versus rook is just a draw. So be careful when your king and pawn are lined up. Your king must stay protecting the pawn. And now after the other check, now we can move closer to our rook here. And now after the final check, our rook is close enough to protect the king. And this is a winning position because if they move the rook to the side somewhere, we could just promote a queen. And if they take, we would just recapture, and the king is too far to save the pawn from queening. So after king c7, for example, we would just queen and checkmate with a queen. Let's recap the technique one more time, because that may have been very confusing and a lot of information if you're seeing this for the first time. So again, not only do I want to give you the steps, but I want to show you how to find them if you forget them. We're not supposed to memorize chess, we're supposed to understand it. So when you see this position, you're like, okay, it's an endgame. What do we know about endgames? The point is to promote a pawn, and the only way to promote the pawn is to get our king out somewhere, unblock our pawn. However, the opponent's pieces are doing very well to stop that, so we have to stop them from stopping us. In other words, the first move must be to give a check in order to be able to get the king out. And then you're in this position and you're like, huh, he said something about, I don't really remember. Let's try to figure it out. So if I do the most logical thing, get the king out, what happens? Well, my opponent's just going to give me a ton of checks. And maybe now you remember, oh, the only way to get rid of these checks was to cover with the rook somewhere. Oh, okay, so let me just go back. It's a very forgiving endgame, so even if you mess up with the checks, you can just go back and try again. So now they waste the move somewhere. And now, hopefully you remember the fourth rank. That's the only thing you have to kind of memorize in this endgame. And they make another waiting move, and now you can get out. Because after all those checks, remember, keep defending your pawn if they're on the same line. After all of these checks now, the final step is to get the rook here. And after the trade of rooks, his king is not close enough to stop promotion. So step 1, give a check. Step 2, get to the fourth rank. Step 3 was to get the king out and protect with the rook. Here's another Lucena position just to practice a different perspective, but all the key elements are here. King on the 8th, pawn on the 7th, and enemy pieces stopping our escape. Our rook could be anywhere. So, step 1, give a check. We go here. They go out. Step 2, get to the fourth rank. By accident, we're already here, so we can move on to step 3. Get the king out and zigzag to the rook. So king here, they have to give a check. King here, check. Here, 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 and rook to b4. Trade rooks or not trade rooks, we're promoting on the next move. However, one thing that I will warn you about is that black can be quite tricky because if we go back, so once we go out and they give the checks, the thing to realize is that here, in this very specific position, we're not actually threatening to promote our pawn. So the next thing I want to teach you is the tricky attempts if you find yourself on the black side. Don't give this check, because that would just make it easy for white. That's what they learned, the technique. So in this position, you can just waste a move and just say, okay, let me see if you know this. So this is a test to the white player to see if they know how to proceed from here. The idea, the concept, the core idea of winning is still the same. You need your rook somewhere here in order to be able to promote the pawn. So instead of going like this, that will be undependent, we just have to take a small detour like this to get to this square b5. And after rook to d5, again, they just have to wait around with something, and we get to build the bridge. And if they trade rooks, the pawn endgame is winning, we're just promoting. If they give a check, then we just shelter our king over here. Which also is worth mentioning, if they gave a check earlier instead of waiting around, if they give a check here, same thing. But now we don't go here, we go here, because the point is to leave a square for your rook. So this is the concept of a shelter square. You can imagine if the rook checks over here are like rain, let's say, it's raining over here, the only place to hide at the moment would be b8, since this pawn provides a shelter square. That's why that's where the name comes from. So with our rook, we're essentially trying to build a new shelter square to have this for promotion. So that's why all of this has to be played. So after this, if they wait around with the rook, we just build the shelter square using a different square for our rook. And there's one very tricky attempt here, which I personally use as black, which is to play the move king e6. Because when the king is here, the most logical thing to do is to do the same thing, but now rook d5 is a horrible blunder, game-drawing blunder, because of rook takes b7. The point is that the king is doing too many things at once. If the king takes here, take here, and this is a draw. Whereas if, what else can white try? They could try to give a check, but the king just sticks to the rook here, attacking it. And again, if we take their rook, they take ours. If not, rook versus rook is just a draw. So be careful about this trick. With king e6, they're placing pressure on the rook, and they already have pressure on the pawn. So this king is simply overloaded, doing too many things at once. So the way you handle this as white is just to give a check to destabilize the king, because the king is in a perfect position where it attacks the rook and it's not in check from the rook. So we give a check, and now the king can either come to the 7th rank or the 5th. If it comes to the 5th, then this maneuver comes with check. Let's see it. Here, here, they go anywhere, and we get in our bridge, and we win the game to promotion. And if they go to the 7th rank in this position, same thing as before. Now they don't have pressure on our rook, so we could just build the bridge. In all cases, white is winning. So these are the tricky attempts for black, which you may try if you're on the defending side. So the king is the trickiest attempt. The last thing I want to show you about the Lucena's bridge is some easier wins. I want to show you why throughout this playthrough, we've been seeing this defensive setup, That's because that's the best defensive setup there is. For example, recently one of my students sent me a game and he was like, oh, I had the Lucena, but it wasn't quite as you showed me. And it was this. Essentially, the opponent's rook was somewhere else. It just wasn't in time to get the setup. And my student got confused about how that changes things. Maybe the rook was even behind the pawn, can't remember now, but it was something along these lines. It was not an optimal defensive setup for black, so there was a possible easier win. So whenever somebody teaches you an endgame, like a theoretical endgame, and in your game it's not quite like that, that means that it's just easier, because when we learn theoretical endgames, we learn the best for both sides, offense and defense. So over here, we just have an easier win. The easier win is to utilize the fact that the rook is not here to take the a file for ourselves. Why is this good? Because the whole point of this endgame is to get somewhere safe with the king to be able to push the pawn. And here with rook a3, we just allow our king to get safely to the a file and just promote on the next move. Let's see how it works. So black can just wait with the rook or with the king, doesn't matter. Let's say here. And after king to a7, we're simply promoting. The only way black could try to stop that is king c7. However, now there's two ways to win. It's a combination of giving a check plus promoting. Both move orders work, so you could first promote, they take it, and then you give a check, and the king moves somewhere here, and you take the rook, so it's a win for white. Alternatively, the other move order also works. Rook check first, they go somewhere here, and we promote. And there's no perpetual check or something like this, because we would just hide in the corner, like this, and cover ourselves with the queen. And the resulting endgame is a win for white. So that was one example of an easier win. Here's another example. One of my students sent me a position like this, and they were like, oh, my opponent reacted differently. I gave them a check as per step 1, but instead of going back, they went here. And my student ended up repeating the position, seeing no better solution. However, everything that you don't get shown in like a YouTube video like this or a resource just means that there's an easier win. So here, what's the easier win for white? The fact that we just have king to c8, and next move we're promoting, and the game is over. So the best defense for black that we learned in the main lines is to go here, because then there's no king c8 because of the check. But now, after king to c6, black's king works against them, because now this is not a check anymore. And promotion is inevitable. So for example, even if you go to the other side threatening some sort of checkmate, that's not really a checkmate because we have rook d8 at the end. Even if we didn't have this move for some reason, we could just give a check first and then promote, leading to promotion with a check or something like this. So there's many ways to solve this problem, but king c8 is just another easier win. So when you learn the high-level technique and all the 3 steps and all those long variations, the reason they are long is because they are optimal for both sides. So that's the best defense for black. These are just faster victories. Hope that makes sense. And now, how do we even get there? How do we get to such a theoretical position that we've never seen before? Well, it requires us to be up a pawn, and the enemy king has been cut off from the party. Whenever you can cut off the king like this from the main area of play, then you should always do so. And the one thing you have to know, which we're going to examine right now, is that the king and pawn can always make progress against the lone defensive rook. Let's see why. Well, the rook, when it's defensive, it can only go on the file of the pawn or on the adjacent file to try and hold these here. If it's attacking the pawn, then your maneuver of progress is to go to the side with the king to stay protecting the pawn. So now we're threatening to push the pawn to make progress. And the only way to stop us from pushing the pawn is to give a check. And now is the important move. We don't go back to where we were. We go up in front of the pawn to create space for the pawn to move ahead on the next turn. Whatever they do now, if they go up or down or attack the pawn, regardless, we're going to go push the pawn. And this is a clear indication that we're able to make progress by force because we started here and here. Now we are here and here. So that's if the rook is attacking the pawn, then we need to hold on to the pawn, go in front, and push. Let's see it one more time. So let's say they just stick around. We go to this side. They give a check. We go here. If they don't give a check, we push. But whatever they do with the rook, there's no way to stop us forever. And now they take this side of our king. And now we do the technique. So check, fourth rank, zigzag, and cover yourself. And that's a victory. So what if the rook, instead of attacking the pawn, was on the file here, not allowing this? Well, in that case, they're not attacking the pawn. So for that reason, you could go here immediately and push the pawn on the next move. So whatever they do with the rook doesn't matter because we're pushing the pawn. So that's how you get from a seemingly realistic looking endgame like this, where you just cut off the king with an extra pawn, into this theoretical endgame that we know. So that was our first example. And let's see a second one even, because it's not every day that you get to cut off the king. So what if the king manages to get into the party? In that case, you could still get to the Lucena, but it's a little bit more challenging. You have to essentially breach the third rank, as we're going to see in our second endgame. When you breach the third rank, that's going to be usually enough for a win. And the reason why is because even if the king is in front of the pawn, we can force it to go away with checkmate threats and checks and stuff like that. So here, rook d8 is the move. And if they go into the rook trade, so into the pawn endgame, that's an instant loss because we're just pre-moving all of this. So for that reason, they have to escape with the king, allowing us to push the pawn with check. And now if they go here, that's just a skewer. So they have to go away. Once they go away from the battle, we go in. So king e7, getting what we know. And let's say they go to the other side, or king c7, doesn't really matter too much. Let's say here, here, and they cut off the other side of our king. Otherwise, we might do an even faster victory. And right now you could give a check if you want to, or you could go to the 8th rank and pawn to the 7th. Maybe the check is a little bit easier just to ensure that the king cannot take part in the battle. And here we go again. So king up, let's say they attack the pawn, we push, they get to the other side, and now we have the technique. It's just that we've already done step 1 to give a check, so now we move on to step 2. 4th rank, and then, get the king out, and zigzag, all the good stuff. Now that we've seen how to take a practical looking endgame, one you might reach in your next game, and turn it into an easy theoretical win using these steps, let's take a look at our second most important rook endgame in all of chess, which is the Philidor position, also known as the third rank defense. Essentially, it is the easiest way to draw an endgame when you're down a pawn in a rook endgame. Essentially, you take the third rank, you take control of the third rank, in this case, this one, and let's explore why you do so and why that's an easy draw. So after rook to a6 here, we're ensuring that if the third rank is breached, they have to go with a pawn first. We're going to see why that matters in a second, but let's just explain why this is a super easy draw. So the only way to make progress with white is to push the pawn first to ensure that the king can safely cross, because these checks, we just go up and down, that doesn't really change things. So for that reason, they have to make progress to the 6th rank, and they can't go with the king first, which they would like, which we're going to see why. So they go with the pawn. But now, when their pawn has committed too far, too close to us, now we go behind and give a million checks. And there's nowhere to hide because the pawn has pushed up. Usually, the king would hide against these checks by going in front of the pawn. But now the pawn is too far ahead. So let's say they play king e6 or something, and we would just give perpetual check from behind. There is nowhere to hide, and this leads to a draw. Let's say they try to hide at the only available square, which is under the rook, but this leads to a drawn pawn endgame after the rook trade. So for that reason, if we go back, rook a6 taking control of the third rank, in this case the 6th rank, but third counting from our side, is the easiest draw. Now let me show you what would happen if you didn't know about this and you just go behind immediately, trying to give a lot of checks. Well, the thing about this is that after rook to a1, your opponent, even though the position is still drawn, it's a much tougher draw. Because now your opponent can really put up pressure with king e6. A very precise king move, because now if you go back to the 6th rank, it's too late. The king has gone first, so now the pawn reaches there as well. And now with both of these, they're just threatening to give us checkmate. If we go back to cover it, they just go to the other side, and we're either getting checkmated or losing a rook. This means that we have to try to go king f8 here to avoid all the checkmate threats, but after rook to b8, our king is getting absolutely way too far away. So for that reason, they will have simple promotion after king e7, which either leads to a Lucena or immediate promotion. For that reason, we cannot go rook to a6, but let's try rook e1, checks from behind. Now, the problem is that they have a shelter square on d6. And why is this a problem? Because their king is safe. So now next move, our king will be forced away from the party, allowing their king to get in and reach a Lucena. Now, theoretically, this position is still a draw, but you have to know one advanced technique, which is outside of the scope of this video. But just to introduce it, the name is Kling and Horwitz defense. The move, the only move to save the position here is Rook to D1, and that's the only draw. Everything else is winning for white, but this is an advanced technique. We're just going to stick to the simple basics for this video. The simple basic is the third rank defense. Take the third rank defense, wait for them to push their pawn, go behind and give perpetual check. Easy. And the last thing I want to show you, if you are an advanced player, is how to win if your opponent doesn't set up the third rank defense in time. So it's a win for the attacking side if the pawn in question is not a knight or rook pawn. So A, B, G, and H pawns are a draw, whereas the center pawns and bishop pawns, so C, D, E, F, are going to be winning for the attacking side. Let's take a look at why, just so we have a good idea of this. So problem is that they cannot go behind ever because of the back rank checkmate, so they have to stick to the back rank defense. They just have to go left and right and hope that they can hold. However, the reason they cannot is because we have a forced win with the move Rook to G7 check. Point being that if they go, they have two options. After King to H8, we go Rook H7 check, King G8, and F7. This is the victory. So that's why our pawn needs to be a center pawn or bishop pawn, because the pawn hits from the center and the rook goes around. That's the only winning technique. So F7 check, King F8, Rook H8, and the rook is lost. Even if the rook was here by chance, that would still be winning because after take, we could just promote. So that's all good. So that's the first variation, King H8. The second variation, King F8, same thing. We go Rook to H7, and there is no way to stop Rook H8 as a threat. Either this is checkmate, or they have to go back, which just again runs into our same variation, F7, King F8, Rook H8. So this is the technique. You have to do it with a check, however, be careful, because if you do it without a check, if you go Rook H7 immediately with the idea of F7, then they can simply just pin your pawn. And okay, you can go back and try again, but this is pretty risky. So do it with check to force their king to one of these squares, where it either comes with check or a checkmate threat. This is the technique. And just to show you the last thing, if it's a knight pawn, let's flip these one around, then there are no winning ideas for the attacking side. You can give a couple checks like this, but that's just about everything. They don't even have to be careful. They can go to F8, H8. There are simply no winning ideas. Congratulations! Now you know the two most important rook endgames in chess. You have mastered them, understood them, and know all the tricks behind them. So now just practice them and use them in real games. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like down below to let me know. If you enjoyed the idea of chess improvement in general, subscribe on my channel to see more stuff like this. Enjoy your week, and I'll talk to you very soon. Take it easy.